One of the greatest problems facing the world today is the conflict between Israel and Palestine. For more than 70 years, this land has known no peace, all because of this struggle. To understand the roots of the issue, we have to go back, and not just a little while, but a long way. Please pay attention that in this program we are not here to take the side of Israel, nor the side of Palestine. Our goal is to tell the real history of this land, and the judgment is yours. We need to travel back to 1,700 years before Christ. At that time, this region was known as the land of the Israelites. 3 prophets of the Israelites, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, lived here, in a place then called Canaan. The people who lived there was called the children of Israel, and they themselves referred to this land as the land of Israel. Moving forward to around 1000 BC, Israel gained its first king, a man named Saul. In historical texts, he is also known as Talut. After Saul, a man named David became king of Israel. He established Jerusalem as his capital. David had a son named Solomon. It was Solomon who built the first great Jewish temple in Jerusalem. From that moment on, it became known as Solomon's Temple. But after Solomon's death, Israel was split in two. In the north, the kingdom of Israel, with Samaria as its capital, and in the south, the kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its center. This division was the beginning of the region's many troubles. The Jews who lived here had tense relations with their neighbors. Every empire that rose in the era sought either to conquer them or to enslave them. Whenever a foreign power seized Jerusalem, Solomon's temple was destroyed, but each time the people returned, they rebuilt it. We arrive now at the time of Cyrus the Great. The story, as written in the Jewish Torah and the Christian Bible, tells us this. The Jews had been enslaved and their temple was destroyed. It was Cyrus who freed them from Babylonian captivity, granting them the resources to rebuild their temple once more. Some say that this tale is more legend than fact, yet it remains preserved, not only in Jewish scripture, but in Christian tradition as well. Centuries passed, and the mighty Achaemenid Empire came to an end. The Parthians rose in Persia, while in the west a new force was gathering momentum. The Roman Empire, expanding, strengthening, and pushing eastward. By 63 BCE, Rome had seized control of the Mediterranean world, and with it, Israel fell into Roman hands. The Romans despised the Jews, and so to erase their identity, they renamed the land to Palestine. The name itself came from the Greek word Philistia, the old Greek name for the region. Rome used it deliberately as a political erasure to remind that the Jews were no longer the masters of their homeland. The Romans didn't enslave the Jews outright, but they did strip them of basics. They couldn't farm, they couldn't own shops, they couldn't even make a living through ordinary trades. And so, the Jews turned to the only avenue left open to them, money. By pooling resources and lending to those in need, they became bankers, moneylenders, and financiers, not out of greed, but out of necessity. Yet from this moment, the stereotype was born, the image of the wealthy Jew built not on truth, but on forced circumstance. Rome eventually expelled the Jews from Palestine. Scattered, they drifted across Europe and Western Asia, a people without a homeland. Time moved on and centuries passed. With Christianity spreading, growing stronger each day, Jerusalem became a holy city not just for Jews but for Christians as well, because Christ himself was born in Palestine and he was crucified in Jerusalem. Then came the 7th century. The armies of Islam surged eastward, defeating the Byzantines, pushing into Persia, and Palestine fell into Muslim hands. Jerusalem too was now sacred to Islam. Jerusalem was once the first Qibla of Islam, the direction of prayer. But in 624 CE, the Qibla shifted to Mecca. Still, when Muslims took Jerusalem, they built a mosque there, Al-Aqsa, also known as Al-Quds. From that moment forward, this city belonged to all three faiths: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. As the Roman Empire collapsed, Jews in Europe faced rising persecution. No longer seen as equals, they were blamed, accused of being the people who crucified Christ. By the 16th century, the Ottomans had taken control of this region, including Palestine, and under the Ottoman rule, the Jews were not oppressed. They lived in relative peace, free to practice their faith. Still, the majority of Jews remained scattered across Europe. Then came the late 19th century. European Jews, especially the Ashkenazi, began to unite, forming a movement that was called Zionism, and its goal was to reclaim their ancestral homeland. By the dawn of the 20th century, tens of thousands of European Jews began migrating to Jerusalem that was still part of the Ottoman Empire. And then, the world was thrown into chaos. World War I erupted. By its end, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, its lands dividing. Most of the Middle East fell under British control, while France and Russia took the rest. After the war, Britain took control of vast territories in the Middle East, and almost immediately, they began drawing new borders. They created three new countries: Iraq, Kuwait, and Jordan. But here is the twist. What we now call Jordan was at that time known as Palestine. The British erased that name and replaced it with Jordan. As for the remaining strip of land, the territory we now associate with Palestine was given a new title: the British Mandate for Palestine. The Muslim population in this region far outnumbered the Jewish newcomers from Europe, and by 1926, tensions had already begun to rise. Clashes broke out, gunfires were exchanged, and the seeds of conflict were planted. Then came 1933. Hitler rose to power in Germany, and his plan was to drive Jews out of Europe. He recognized the Zionist movement as the most organized among the Jewish groups, and so he struck a deal. 60,000 German Jews were to leave Germany and relocate to Palestine, but in 1937, the British, bitter enemies of Hitler, stepped in. They refused to allow such a transfer, and with that, Hitler's plan to expel Germany's Jews into Palestine collapsed. 2 years later, World War II erupted. The Nazi Party declared that all of Germany's misfortunes are the fault of the Jews, and we all know the tragedy that followed. By 1947, 2 years after the war's end, the United Nations proposed a plan. Palestine would be divided into two states, one Arab and one Jewish. Jerusalem, because of its religious significance, would become an international city neutral for all faiths. But the Muslim Palestinians rejected the idea outright. They insisted that all of Palestine was theirs. Then came 1948. The British withdrew from Palestine, and immediately the Zionist movement, now powerful and organized, declared that this is no longer Palestine, but Israel. Civil war broke out. Arab nations rallied to support Palestinians, and what began as internal conflict soon escalated into a full Arab-Israeli war. But the new Israeli state, aided by outside support, forced the Arab armies into retreat. The Palestinians were pushed into the West Bank and into the Gaza Strip. More than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, driven into exile in Jordan, Lebanon, and beyond. This moment became known as the Nakba, the catastrophe. Tensions did not end there, but they only grew stronger. By 1967, war erupted again. This time, a full-scale conflict between Israel and nearly all its Arab neighbors. It became known as the Six-Day War. In less than a week, Israel's forces had seized vast territories, the Sinai Desert from Egypt, the entire West Bank, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The map of the Middle East had changed, and the conflict had only deepened. After the Six-Day War, even more Palestinians were driven from their homes. At the same time, Jews from across the world migrated to Israel, and for the first time in centuries, Jews became the majority in the land. From then on, the conflict only persisted. Every peace proposal, every negotiation came back to the same idea to divide the land into two states. But Israel insisted. This was their ancestral homeland, and they wanted more, refusing to share Jerusalem. By 2007, the Palestinians themselves had split into two factions. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, and in Gaza a smaller but harder-line group, Hamas. Hamas vowed never to negotiate, declaring that its only mission was the destruction of Israel. But the Palestinian Authority pursued the opposite path, pushing for a two-state deal. Then, in 2018, the US President Donald Trump made a move that shook the region. America became the first country to relocate its embassy to Jerusalem. For many in the Arab world, it felt like betrayal. And so the cycle continued. Hamas launched rockets into Israel, and Israel striking back caused attacks after attacks and retaliation after retaliation. Observers began to call the region a ticking time bomb, a bomb that had been counting down for over 70 years. That bomb finally went off 2 years ago. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to support us by subscribing.